It's been a pleasure to be here as part of the Compendium meeting. And I think I'm going to be speaking very practically, I think, about some of these issues that arise through participation and inclusion. And I think it maybe is stepping back a little bit from the very high-level, policy-level discussions you've been having today. But I hope it works as a provocation for the discussions you're going to have, or we're going to have later. So I'm really pleased to be here and to share with you the work of North Edinburgh Arts, which is the cultural organisation that I run. I was lucky yesterday to meet with Dorian and some of the other colleagues from Rijeka 2020 and to hear about the 27 Neighbourhoods programme, which I think is really showing your intent for what you want to achieve from the wider Rijeka 2020 programme. And everybody so far has been incredibly generous with their time, and I've certainly had a very warm welcome. So as an Irish woman working in Scotland and speaking in English, I hope that I will be clear and concise with you this morning and sharing some of my ideas. And I'm also, as an Irish woman, very pleased that Galway are also celebrating their European Euroculture 2020, and so I'll be visiting both cities that year. So as you will know, Edinburgh has a global reputation for being a city of culture, starting with the International Festival in 1947. And that was set up to provide a platform for the flowering of the human spirit by creating a post-World War II identity as the cultural resort of Europe. Now, the International Festival has been joined over the years by 10 other annual festivals. And in 2017, the 70th anniversary, Sorcha Carey, who's the director of the Edinburgh Art Festival, stated, "Our festivals are both profoundly international and distinctly Scottish, and we are proud of the unique role we play in supporting the country's cultural sector." And in that year, 2017, the festivals collectively saw a record audiences of 4.6 million people. And that was coupled with record local participation. So the Edinburgh People's Survey taken that year revealed that 76% of the population felt that the festivals make Edinburgh a better place to live. And for a little bit more background information, the net economic impact of those collective festivals in 2015 was reported in excess of £270 million, with 5,500 full-time jobs directly attributable to their existence. So I think you can agree that for our city, culture is a very big deal. Aha. And it's also quite a big deal for firework manufacturers. I live quite near the city centre, and through the month of August we have a nightly firework display and twice nightly on Saturdays. But how are these benefits manifested in the so-called hard to reach? What impact does the festival and the undoubted cultural riches of the city have on those who live at the margins? So this is the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation map as recorded in 2016. It's often described as a reverse donut in that everything good is in the centre and the areas of deprivation are on the outskirts of the city, which I think is in direct contrast with the kind of European city experience. So the community where North Edinburgh Arts is situated is the very red part to the top left of the map. And it's situated in the most deprived area of the city and one of the most deprived areas of the country. I think we find that particularly in our capital city that wealth very much masks areas of extreme poverty. Once again. So the centre is built within a typically post-Second World War estate Built in the 1950s, it was set up to house the kind of slum clearances from the city centre on the Royal Mile that runs from Edinburgh Castle to Holyrood Palace. And the press stated at the time that the project could be the envy of Scotland. And I think this young man's face of optimism states that he was agreeing with the press at that time. But with hindsight, and hindsight is a wonderful thing, we know that that's not the case. You may be aware of the film Trainspotting, starring Ewan McGregor. Much of the storyline is set in and around the area where our cultural centre is. And this is often used as a shorthand for people living at the edge, both physically and socially. But the one thing, or one of the things that the area does have, is that it's an area of activism. And it uses the arts in many instances in this activism to draw attention to the poverty and inequalities experienced across the area. And I think this is partly due to the historical trade unionisation of the local factories that were operating near this community, and also the organising of labour amongst the skilled trades. But I think it's now accepted that the buildings were substandard, with issues arising due to poor building materials, particularly in that period just after the Second World War, poor design, poor amenity planning, and these all contributed to the difficulties for the community from the outset. Difficulties, I think it must be noted, that were imposed upon the families that were moving into Muir House and housed within these buildings, not coming from those families. So the organisation that I run, North Edinburgh Arts, is cited within this confluence of poor short-term planning, which has been exacerbated by a decline in industry and employment in the area from the 1970s onwards. So what does it mean to be a cultural centre at the heart of a community ravaged by decades of poor quality planning and at the very sharp end of austerity cuts? And also with the introduction by the current Conservative government in London, not Scotland, of universal credit. Now this represents the biggest change in the welfare system in the UK since the 1940s. And to give you an indication of the impact it's having, the Trussell Trust, who operate from over 400 centres across the UK and provide a minimum of 3 days emergency food and support to people experiencing crisis, they say of universal credit, rather than acting as a service to ensure people do not face destitution, the evidence suggests that for people on the very, very lowest incomes, the poor functioning of universal credit can actually push people into bills, debts, and ultimately lead them to a food bank. People are falling through the cracks in a system not made to hold them. So against that very harsh background, what is this, I think, very beautiful building here for? As an aside, this is one of our architect's pictures. It was taken 16 years ago, but even with 5,000 people coming in and out of the venue on a monthly basis, the building is still warm and welcoming and makes people feel like they matter. And visiting Rehab yesterday, I got the same sense that there's an air of quality to this building that makes people and will make people feel that they matter. So in answering the question, what is North Edinburgh Arts there for? We're looking to three main informers of our work currently that link the individual, the neighbourhood and the national, and I would suggest the global after that. So the first main informer of our work is adverse childhood experiences. These are often referred to as ACEs, and they're 10 traumatic events that can have negative, lasting effects on health and well-being into adulthood. They affect the brain and the ability to make relationships and forge positive connections. And it's stated that if you have experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, then your ability to relate is severely impaired. And these are the 10 kind of risk factors. So it is about living in an area of poverty, It's maybe having a parent with a drug or alcohol problem, or it's having a parent who was depressed or mentally unwell. So it's obvious to me and to the team that I work with that the majority of people living in the square kilometre around our venue are living in poverty. So by default, they've experienced at least one of these cases. And from building relationships with people and from getting to know them better, we know that many of the people we are working with are labouring under 4 or 5 ACEs and sometimes as many as 10. So it's clear to us that we need to consciously shift the narrative from saying what's wrong with you to saying what has happened to you, and that kind of changes how the way we do everything. And I was reading further about ACEs on my way here as a cheery reminder on my journey here. And ACEs are undoubtedly contributing to the health inequalities gap. And unfortunately, Scotland has the widest health inequality gap in Europe, despite being one of the sixth richest nation in the world. We've got the widest inequality gap. One of my colleagues recently undertook training in adverse childhood experiences, specifically within a community context. And the 3 messages that she shared with us were that we must put relationships at the core of our work. We must demonstrate respectful, healthy relationships that uphold human dignity. We must create a welcoming atmosphere for everyone using our centre, and recognise that within the area we operate, it is one of the first destinations for many people. And we must be kind, which I think is easier to say than do. And it's interesting that Scotland, that the adverse childhood experience thinking is really taking root in Scotland. There was quite a major conference about it last year, and Scotland is aiming to be the first ACE-aware nation. So to try and unpack that thinking about be kind, 2 very simple words but very difficult to play out, I wanted to investigate further what being kind would look like in an organisational level. And to assist with this, I looked to the recent Carnegie UK Trust research into kinder communities. This was funded by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation in the UK. And their conclusion, I think, is starkly simple but very difficult to kind of play through. They say, everyday help is often mundane and practical and frequently goes unnoticed, but it can have important emotional consequences. And I think it's that last bit that really resonates with us. It's the trying to play out the importance of kindness for emotional consequences. And they go further to talk about place, and they say the physical characteristics of residential and public spaces shape everyday help by creating or restricting opportunities for engagement and civility. But the perceived image of places and neighbourhoods, attachment to place and shared narratives about it also play an important role. These mechanisms can be a means of inclusion, but also of exclusion. And I think that resonates with your ambitions for Rijeka 2020, in that you want to make sure from the outset that you're welcome and welcomed all. And I think this building is certainly the first step along that route. And for us in our work, this kind of relates back to the ideas coming through the adverse childhood experience, in that we're not operating to fix people, and we're not operating to cure them. Nobody needs to be saved. That's not the role. But place is vitally important, and it's essential that we operate our centre. It's got to be informal. There's got to be no sign-up. There's got to be an absolute reduction in barriers. And we've got to essentially go out with no agenda. And that's a terribly scary thing to do for an organisation, but we've got to be there as clearly open as we can be. So it's not necessarily about service provision, it's more about giving people agency within their own lives. So we're not bringing deemed valuable cultural artefacts to people and saying, there you go, and if you don't get it, there's something wrong with you. It's about changing that whole narrative on its head. And to embed this culture of kindness within organisations, we need to be risk-taking, which I said is quite a scary thing to do. We need to constantly check in with people as they come in to our building, and we need to go above and beyond. It's not just about putting a service on and then waiting to see. It's about going that step further to make sure people feel valued. I've taken this slide from my colleagues at Architecture and Design Scotland, and they had a recent conference about what makes a caring place, what do we need to have in place to make a caring place. And I think it comes from giving people permission, working on a set of shared values, and also agreeing shared boundaries. And I think that kind of applies within the micro-network, but also by extension applies to the neighbourhood, to the city, and to the region. And I think North Edinburgh Arts and our building is central to enabling Muir House to be a caring place. So we're giving people a sense of support, hopefully helping people have a sense of worth, a sense of place, and a sense of purpose. And this kind of continuum needs to be checked kind of consistently to make sure that we're contributing and not taking away from the area. And this kind of resonates with me because I'm going to read a quotation from the Social Attitude Survey of 2013, which I think pushes this idea further. It says this: the geographic separation of individuals and families experiencing poverty concentrate disadvantage and stigma, with the result that people living in the least deprived areas are almost twice as likely to say that most people can be trusted, compared with people in the most deprived areas. And the statistics are 61% and 34% respectively. So in the immediate area around the building that I work, people are twice as likely not to trust their neighbour and not to trust their kind of fellow citizens. And I think that's a really harsh statistic. So you can see that people quite naturally are likely to be highly defensive, and it takes a very long time to build trust. When many people have, many of their other relationships, either through services or familial, have betrayed them. And I think I'm saying all this, that it's a bit like an onion. You've got to kind of peel through the layers of individual, neighbourhood, and kind of city distrust to get to where you want to be. And putting this into a kind of national context, the Scottish Government have recently published their National Performance Framework, and 3 points of interest I think need to be picked up from this. The first one is that culture is explicitly noted for the first time in the National Performance Frameworks, and I think we have to thank Fiona Hislop, the Minister for Culture, for ensuring that's happened. And in this, for the first time, kindness is the key value referenced at the very core of it. I mean, you probably can't read that. I can't read it and I've got my spectacles on, but kindness is front and central to the National Performance Framework. And I think that shows a really interesting approach for a government. And also the framework links directly to the goals, the UN goals for sustainable development. And as a bit of an aside, to show how this cross-cutting approach can work, Scotland has started approaching knife crime as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. And last year there were no recorded deaths attributable to knife crime in Scotland, which is in stark contrast to statistics in England and Wales. And I think other drivers at play in making it appear that Scotland as a nation is positioning itself differently from the rest of the UK are the undoubted impact of the 2014 independence referendum. People are politically engaged. It's a politically engaged population. I mean, even if people aren't in accord, they are active. And you may or may not have seen last Saturday there was a march for independence in the city, and 100,000 people turned out and marched in the capital. The Scottish Government in 2015 introduced the Community Empowerment Scotland Act, And that's a mechanism for communities to have a proactive role in having their voices heard in how services are planned and delivered. And this is a really important shift to citizen engagement. And as noted before, Scotland's wanting to be the world's first ACE-aware nation. So politically, culturally, ethically and environmentally, it's positioning itself as a forward-thinking nation, which is somewhat against the UK tide. And of course, a large majority within Scotland and all 32 council areas voted to remain within the EU. So I haven't talked very much about art yet, so I'm going to let one of the artists that we work with say a few words on this film. This is Hans Clausen, who was engaged with us for about 3 years to run a participation programme that led to a public artwork within a health facility beside our building.
My greatest sort of ambition for the project is that it brings people together. I think as an artist, that's really what I'm interested in. You can facilitate or create something that brings people together. Incredibly important to me that these objects and this project is seen by local residents as something that belongs to them.
I've been playing now for about 24 years. They're unique to the Queensberry Bowling Club. My best memory actually is when I won this cup. I remember my speech as well. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
Locally in Africa, that's what most homes used to sweep the floor.
He says, would you like to go to Palestine? Just right there the minute. I says, what? And I thought, that's a war zone. People die over there. I'll go. I'm from Muirhouse.
I mean, these bags were very popular in the 20s and 30s. I mean, personally, I would have kept it forever and ever, but it's lying in a wardrobe in my house, so, and I couldn't take it out that often nowadays. I mean, I used to play with it when I was young, but no, no. Contrary to popular belief, I'm 64-year-old.
That feeling of pride about them being there, you start to then be drawn to the other things that are in there. And I just think it's brilliant. I think it's a great talking point. I think it's a great piece that will speak to people there for whatever reason, if they were a regular in the Gunner, or if they went to St Paul's, or if they did majorettes like me.
Ismail Laguna had just regained the world title, and he wanted a patsy. And I said, nah, I'll take the fight, Jack.
Kenny taught me a lot of things as well. What was it, Kenny? Don't eat too much.
Yeah.
So those were some very authentic Edinburgh voices there. I sometimes can't work out what they're saying, so I hope you got the gist. So with all these kind of global, national, local frameworks informing our work, how does this make, what impact does this have on our output and outcomes? We're trying to boil those frameworks down and couple this with a lead from American artist and academic Frances Whitehead, whose embedded artist joins the daily work of the city as problem solver and agent of change. And I'm going to paraphrase Patrick Fox, who's the chief executive of a Heart of Glass programme based near Liverpool in the UK. And I think Patrick is a really interesting commentator to follow, because he talks very clearly about recognising the social as value. Again, it's not about artefact, it's about recognising the social as value and artists' role in that. And it's about artists making meaning in the broadest of contexts. And I think if you can frame your work within those two phrases, then you kind of get an understanding of what we're trying to do. And it's interrogating this notion of resilience. Oftentimes in the UK, artists are invited into a community, a deprived community, and what they're charged with doing is saying to people, you have to be better. You have to be better to deal with the dysfunction you're facing on a daily basis, and if you aren't, you're the problem. And I think it's exactly the reverse that we're trying to talk about. We want to work with artists who connect with communities and who voice their opinions about this dysfunction that they unwittingly find themselves in. So we aspire to work with and for local residents and participants to ensure artworks resonate. Context is everything for us, and the quality of the work is key. It's incredibly important to us because of where we are and not despite it. We're not a band of artists and programmers desperately wanting to work in the city centre. We're working where we are because it's our kind of passion. So how does this look in terms of how we plan and what we do? As I said before, our role within Muir House and North Edinburgh is one of kindness, and it looks a little bit like this. It's always long term. I like to programme in terms of years, not months, and we don't set start dates and end dates. We know we have to be there consistently. I've been working with North Edinburgh Arts for 10 years now, and unbelievably it just feels like I'm just starting to get somewhere. So I know that Rijeka 2020 is coming up in 2 years, but really that's just the start of this. The legacy of your work will resonate for years. We've got to start where people are at. It's not about bringing things to people, and if we don't feel they're experiencing it properly, there's a lack. It's about making sure that we start to unpack the kind of the cultural and critical awareness of the communities where we are. It's about offering layers of opportunity. We do a lot of work with children, we do a lot of drop-in work, we do a lot of taster work, and it's kind of self-directed, and that's okay. You know, somebody may just come into our venue and have a cup of tea for many years in a row, and that's okay. It's about people making their own way within the space and feeling agency within that. And it's about protecting the space, both physical and mental, and keeping it going. Failure, you can sometimes feel that you failed at the outset, but it's just because you haven't tried for long enough. So I think this message of consistency and just keeping going sometimes in face of adversity is key. So one of the major changes for our venue was the establishment in 2014 of a community garden, and I just love this picture. It's just got that feeling of hopefulness. It's provided a green lung for the community, and it's a place to meet and grow vegetables and flowers and to forge connections. I think often people sometimes don't quite understand what an art centre is for, but certainly everybody understands what a garden is for. And really for us, it's all about the artists, and it's about getting the right artists. I'm not quite sure how I explain what a right artist is, but it's about relationships, relationships, relationships. It's about artists who have the ability to be a listener, to reflect, and who are skilled, intuitively trained educators who see the potential in every engagement and are adept at making thoughts concrete. I think there's a lot of value in reflecting back to participants their thoughts in a creative and beautiful way. So people engage at whatever level they're ready, from that little cup of tea every day to, we also run advanced Brechtian theatre. So we're kind of going from all sides. And I feel that North Edinburgh Arts is a place where we literally share food, share ideas, and share risks. And getting on to some more illustrations of how this plays out. This is an art project again by artist Hans Clausen, who you saw in the film, with Sally Price, another young artist in Edinburgh, and it's called Make Your Mark, and it springs from this 3-year residency programme looking at place, and a place that is seemingly in a state of flux. So Make Your Mark used recycled materials and encouraged hundreds of people to come together to make a small sculptural piece. So everybody has their personality in there, but crucially it's hung together in a community. Now these images were taken in Muir House last summer by photographer Paul Duke. And Paul's really interesting to us because he grew up in Muir House, but he lives and works in London. And he wanted to return to document this community, his community. And the resulting body of work is called No Ruined Stone, and that's taken from a poem by Scottish poet Hugh MacDiarmid, who says, his key phrase is, "There are plenty of ruined buildings, but no ruined stones." And Paul's work, I feel, is the embodiment of kindness. And Paul kind of found his way to our building. And I think he was up and down from London to Edinburgh over 3 years. And having the open space where people freely came to meet was key to his work, really getting into the psyche of the area. And Martin Boyd, writing in the foreword to Paul's book, says, "Parallel communities like these can be found all over the world, but few will have been photographed so protectively and with such grace." And I think it's that kind of giving of dignity back to a community that is at the very sharp end of austerity is key. So moving on, this is our North Edinburgh Theatre project, led by applied theatre specialist Stephanie Knight. And they have a track record for showcasing exciting, innovative productions and events and create work which involves social change. That's the kind of key driver behind it. They also focus on wider international influences. Everybody's welcome, no previous experience is required, and they always have fun, they're very curious, and they're always learning about themselves. They did a kind of a whistle-stop tour through 100 years of theatre styles, so they've got the Brechtian work at the top, Comedy of Manners down here, and then the piece in the bottom left corner is an intergenerational piece, so families can come and work together, and this shows young people dancing the steps of their parents, their grandparents, from the 1950s onwards. This piece is Natalie Taylor's Community Labyrinth, created with and by community members in a bit of fallow land outside one of our local churches, and one of the local churches that has a declining congregation. And the minister in this church has reported that people are using these two seats at either side of the labyrinth as an informal place of solace and an informal place of meeting. And I think that taps right back into the need for unmediated space, vital, according to the Carnegie UK report, to create opportunities for engagement and civility. And this is Lindsay Perth's sister piece to Hans's work in the foyer that the film covered. So this again is the result of a 3-year residency where Lindsay, to echo my colleague's thoughts around the adverse childhood experiences, she put relationships at the heart of her work. She was kind and she created a welcoming atmosphere. So I think she spent 2.5 years talking, having tea and biscuits, and then this 6-month period. So it's made up of 52 glass shades which were hand blown and engraved by local residents. And to my mind, this is kind of kindness in action. These images show some of the residents that Lindsay engaged with using the facilities of the Edinburgh College of Art. And to them, this was a mind-blowing experience. A, they didn't know we had an Edinburgh College of Art. And to go up and to be, within this spirit-lifting place where possibilities are endless. They had a fantastic 2 days, blowing glass. I wanted to go with them, but I wasn't allowed. And they just really enjoyed themselves, so much so that one of the participants stopped me and just said, "I have to tell you, this has changed my life." So very, very moving work. And so the 52 glass shades are hanging in this NHS building. And I feel they come from a place of respect, from sharing and from collaboration. And Lindsay, as an artist, has taken the very essence of the people she worked with and put them out in a beautiful piece of work. And she's reflected that she feels this work really shows the strength and fragility of the community within which we are operating. So to recap and to summarise, it's all about the place. It's about ensuring the place is cared for and open and accessible. It's about giving people permission and recognising that there is a level of fear within people. There's a social commentator called Darren McGarvey. He's a young man from Glasgow who grew up in an area of poverty. He's just written an Orwell Prize-winning book called Poverty Safari, and I would recommend it to you. He talks about the abject fear of stepping out of the norm in an area of poverty and the stress levels that growing up in poverty impose on you. So I think cultural spaces and cultural endeavours like this are about being that safe space and about giving people permission to step out and try new ideas. And I think that's sharing ideas is so vitally important. It's about consistency, it's about being long-term, and it's about starting where people are at. It's absolutely not about making people better. So I hope I've been able to show the link in the thinking that starts from the challenging the adverse childhood experience, looking at the caring place, kinder communities, and linking into the national framework, performance framework, and then linking that into the goals for sustainable development. Now, I know you're undertaking a huge amount of work towards Rijeka 2020, and you're considering how to go forwards. So I hope my small presentation and the voices from Edinburgh have contributed in some way to the discourse that I know you're having and that you're going to have. And I'm extremely excited to hear how things go over the next 2 years. I'd be delighted to make connections with anybody in the room and invite you warmly to Edinburgh and to North Edinburgh to share some of this work firsthand. And I'm going to leave you with a short film that I have to say doesn't speak a great deal about art, but it does talk about emotions. So I hope it's not going over old ground, but I think it's nice again to hear some authentic voices. Thank you.
Friendly,
amazing,
unusual, brilliant,
community,
special,
It's creative,
inspiring,
absolutely amazing,
fun.
If I had to describe this building and this organisation in 3 words, I would say innovative, risk-taking and caring.
Teachers don't understand how hard to try.
North Edinburgh Arts is kind of slap bang in the middle of Muir House, which is an area that has gone through a huge amount of change in the last 20, 30 years. There's been a lot of kind of substandard housing and poor infrastructure in and around about us. And I think I see North Edinburgh Arts as the signal for change.
You come in here, you meet all sorts of different people, great people. You can have so many different conversations.
It's a really welcoming environment for people who like art and want to come along and do some classes and meet new people and maybe have a snack down in the cafe.
Because when it was first built, a lot of locals didn't take to this place. They were sort of like, why do we need an art centre in your house? Why? But now, I mean, it's certainly the heart of the community now. There's so many clubs that run out of here. There's my mum, I've got my mum coming to a knit and art group here.
And if people didn't have this, I think it'd be quite miserable living around here, because they're always developing it and building houses, but they take so long to do anything.
There's so many really imaginative and interesting things that go on here. And over the years, we've been to so many different things, whether it's theatre shows or dance things or yoga or creative things. So there's things that happen in the regular programme, and then there's the special events that happen. And there's so many opportunities which are affordable for families in this area, and it kind of brings the community together, which is another thing that matters to me.
It's in Muir House, it very much does belong to the locals. I don't personally belong to them, but this is a wee hub here, and it's a great hub to have. I would hate to think what we'd have if we didn't have this art centre right now. If we take away the art centre, there's not much here.
They've got such imagination of what things to do, and so friendly. It's just like my second home.
We've got over 17 hours a week of creative activity that we programme directly ourselves, and that can be anything from very young children getting creative with their parents, and then we've also got workshops for like the older children in the fine arts, in craft, in theatre, in circus, in singing, and also in the dramatic arts.
Children can come here from whatever background and have the best possible start in art or gardening or anything, really.
You know, I think this building is set in a pretty harsh physical and sometimes harsh social landscape, and so it's about being able to provide a relaxing, supportive, beautiful space.
Everybody's friendly, meeting people.
The staff in the Arts Centre, you can ask for better staff. It's a very family-friendly environment.
You can go outside into a wonderful garden, but it's not always been a wonderful garden. Because before it was like a big mess with glass all over, but everybody here came together and it turned into a brilliant place.
This place is a place of discovery for the people who come through the door, for the artists that we work with, for the staff team, for myself. It's about, well, look, what is it we can do together differently? What is it we can contribute to each other? And, you know, I had my own journey of discovery with the arts, and that it changed my life completely, and I suppose I hope that this place embodies that.
I mean, I've had depression, and there's times when I couldn't be bothered, but it motivates you because there's somewhere to go to, and even like a couple of hours on the morning just gives you the motivation to do something, and then you go home and you think, oh, that bit of material, I think I'll cut that up and make that into something.